E mihi tonu ana kia tātou I tēnei wā. Just welcoming everybody here today on this really warm day for us up here in the north. Nō reira, māku te karakia I tēnei wā. Nō reira, me ino I tātou. Ngā mihi mahana o te rā ki te whānau e hui nei, kia tau te rangi Mārie, kia whakatapua tātou I a tātou me ngā mea e whakapono ana. Haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. With the greetings of the day to the whānau gathered here, let peace be with us and may we respect each other and what we believe, bind together, gather together, united. Mauri ora kia tātou. Ko te whakatau ki mo tēnei rā, he kai kei aku ringa. This just sort of refers to the fact that we have the potential within us to do whatever it is that we put our minds to. So we thought with that, we'll get started into our presentation, and I'd just like to hand it over to Corinne.
Morning everyone, just a little bit of housekeeping for you. So just as always, just please mute unless you're sharing. We are recording this session and we will share it with you. So let's connect, inspire and uplift each other. Add any gems or patai you have to the chat throughout the session, and we will be keeping a record of these to guide our next webinar.
Oh, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I'm now unmuted. So just our agenda for today, we are going to be looking and having a recap of the science of learning, a recap of the cognitive strategies, and then looking into using these cognitive strategies in structured literacy. And then we're going to have a wrap up and next steps.
And at this stage, we'd just like to welcome Julie Nugent, and she's going to be presenting alongside us today. Tēnā koe, Julie. Over to you.
Kia ora, Deb and RTLB team. I just want to check, is my sound okay? Good. I'm seeing a nod from the left. Good. Thanks, Deb. Kia ora, thanks for another opportunity to talk about structured literacy and in particular the science of learning. And this is something that everybody I know is already on the journey of. So if there's stuff that I say that you already know, then that's great. I'm not going to be able to give you all the answers to everything, but I think it's worth reflecting on how the structured literacy approach fits really well with the science of learning. Science of learning, of course, though, doesn't just sit within literacy. It's within maths. It's within everything that you're doing. So I'm going to flick through to the next one, please. Learning outcomes. Right, I'm not sure which screen I'm looking at. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is just some key principles from the science of learning and then how they align with literacy instruction, and then talk about some strategies that we can use within our teaching. Next, please, Deb. So I am a new RTLB to Cluster 1 Te Tai Tōkaro, but I am not a new RTLB. And in fact, recently I've just moved from Cluster 8 and a role as a literacy specialist with in my RTLB role and as a facilitator with Massey University in structured literacy. So literacy, while it's not my current field, is what I've just been immersed in, and I'm really interested in particular in the science of learning and how emotions and self-regulation and everything fit with that. So I've tried to tie some of that into my work today. Next, please. So we know that learning and the science of learning, which is, there's no kind of edge to it and it's not black and white, but we know that it is a body of knowledge that's been informed by cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and educational research. There's a lot of people with fingers in the pie, and we're trying to make sense of it all. We know that learning is about what our brain does when it receives information, how it processes it and how it stores it, and that learning actually changes our brain. And more we're becoming aware of how much emotions impact how that learning happens. The science of learning helps us understand how students learn best so that we can design effective instruction to get that knowledge, that new and important knowledge, into the parts where it needs to be so we can access it again later on. Okay, next. Okay, so cognitive load theory is our key theory at this point that we need to be thinking about. Learning is a change in the brain. So if we were to look at a brain before something was learnt and then look at it afterwards, there's actually new connections made. And those connections happen really rapidly when it's well supported and learning is effectively designed. So first of all, information is processed in that working memory space, and then it's moved from that fridge space, which can't hold a lot of information, into the freezer, into the long-term memory so that we can access it again later on. And cognitive load theory is what happens in that space from working memory into long-term memory. So we need to be able to work with that. So structured literacy, we know that it draws from the science of reading, and some of these models may be familiar to you. The one on the right is from the National Reading Panel way back in 2000, and it talks about these elements being really important in our literacy instruction. Whereas the one on the left, the reading wheel, it includes oral language, which just seems to be missing from the one on the right, and it's tied together some of the reading and the writing elements together. But science of reading informs structured literacy. It tells us what we should teach and why, but not necessarily how. So the principles within structured literacy guide us how to teach. So we know that it needs to be systematic, sequential, and cumulative. We know that it needs to be diagnostic and explicit. And the attention and working memory buffers, my working memory is not doing well at the moment because my attention is drawn to conversations that I can hear on the side of the room, and I'm very easily distracted. So I'm very sorry. Where our attention is where our learning is. So if our attention is distracted by something else, we will miss learning. It helps us to prioritize what's important and what we need to focus on, and deprioritize what's not important. It shields us from sounds, images, and other less important stimuli, which I'm having trouble with this morning. The last time we looked at that video, where I don't know if you remember, but it's here for you to get later on if you want to. We were counting how many times the ball was passed. So that's where our attention was. And in the middle of that video, someone in a gorilla suit walked all the way through the middle. And for those of us that were really focused on the ball being passed and keeping our counting right, we missed the man in the gorilla suit until it was pointed out to us later on. So our working memory is limited. It can only actually process up to about 7 pieces of information, but most people sort of sit at that 3 to 4. And it's really impacted by other sensory information, by what's important, mood, emotions, all sorts of things. So we're working on the intrinsic and the extrinsic cognitive load in this space. So we really need to be designing learning that takes advantage of what we know about mediating and mitigating extrinsic learning factors. Can we close that door? Sorry, I'm just asking for a door to be closed. Okay. Just one second while I try and gather my slides. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a glitch going on at my end. Okay, so if our working memory is overloaded, and we're going to go into the next slide in a second, we need our learning is going to be impaired. So Sweller, 1988, it's old theory, but it's currently in our spheres of the work that we're doing. When we understand cognitive load theory, so on the next slide, dear. Thanks. Understanding cognitive load theory helps us optimize the load that's coming in. So we want to make sure that there is all extraneous information is reduced, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, so that the intrinsic load is what's optimized. So we want to be aware, we can't get too much information being processed at the same time. Whoops, I've got a mouse in the middle of that box. Learning happens when new information moves from our working memory to our long-term memory. That's almost like moving from the fridge into the freezer so we can access it again later on. And we've got some strategies to help that happen so that those new brain connections, that brain change can happen how it's supposed to. So cognitive overload can happen when students are required to complete tasks by themselves without any prior instruction or guidance or scaffolding. Students can be overloaded with distractions, like I just was then. There you go. That was a perfectly practiced modeled example. And then they can't think about the information that they're supposed to be focused on. When we are in a structured learning approach, we're really guiding learning. It's sequential, it's cumulative. So the cognitive load that may reduce or may be interfering with our working memory is reduced, so we can really get to what we need to get to. Next slide, please. Thank you. So making new learning stick. Here we go. Okay, so new knowledge is like Velcro. It's like mental Velcro. It's got to stick to other related knowledge. And the more access you have to knowledge that's already in place, the more new information can stick to it. So when a student focuses on new information, they can recall prior information or concepts or procedures from their long-term memory. Then those new connections and new information have a link to existing schemata. Now, this is worth thinking about when we think about novice students. So students that are new to some information, they're having to work so much harder because they don't already have a pre-existing pile of Velcro there for new stuff to stick to. So they may take longer, they may need more scaffolding, and they may need more support. The other thing that's in play that really impacts our learning, yep, Kim, we're going to have the slideshow shared with you. So the other thing that impacts our learning is our emotions. So when information enters through our senses into our brain for processing, first of all, it passes through the amygdala, and the amygdala analyzes that information to work out whether we should be scared or excited or calm or joyful, whatever other emotion we need to attach to it. And then once that's done, it's passed to the frontal cortex, where the information is analyzed again. Is this new? Is this familiar? Then it's passed through the hippocampus, which works out whether this is important or relevant or whether it needs to be deprioritized. And when all of that happens, it's attached to existing information and then it's stored. The emotions are key. They influence what's stored, how it's stored, and where it's stored. They affect learning, and then learning also affects emotions again. So that it's a cycle, and it needs to be central in our work. So how do we work with emotions when we're teaching someone within structured literacy or within the science of learning? We know that emotions enhance memories. So we talked a little bit about how memories are attached to new learning, and then that affects where it's stored. Emotions enhance memories and they lead to deeper learning. Emotions also can direct or misdirect students' attention, and emotions can determine how well a student engages with that new learning. If somebody is really overloaded with thinking about something that may have happened at lunchtime or before school, or something that's happening socially, or they may be new to a classroom and not quite feeling like they're safe or that they belong, the learning is going to be really minimal compared to somebody who may be feeling, oh yeah, I belong here, I'm safe, this is important to me, this is relevant to me, I know what I'm doing because I can attach it to something that's familiar already. I belong, I can get support or scaffolding if I need it. So how can we work with emotions? The first thing that researchers suggest is we need to make learning personally relevant. We need to support students to link learning with personal experiences. So in that structured literacy kind of context, that can be impacted by the language, the pictures that are in a book, or the topic, what it's about. It could be something that is built on to a familiar story. It could be the type of activity that you're doing. Are you doing it in a cooperative situation with a friend or somebody else? Oops, I've jumped back. I need to go back one, please. Can I go back to the one with the emotions? Where have I gone? Slide 17. Thank you. So we can make learning personally relevant. So linking learning with personal experiences. keeping information interesting and stimulating, that doesn't mean it has to be fun. If you are dancing around and using all your energy to make something really captivating, you're going to burn yourself out, because what's fun for you might not be fun for someone else. But yes, keep it lively, keep it interesting, keep it relevant, and then it will be stimulating, and then the emotions are keyed in as they should be. We can support students' sense of belonging in a space and in the task. This is relevant to me. I'm safe here. It's like, sometimes that's why people have some difficulty with maths. Like, what is the point of learning this? This is too hard. It's not relevant to me. Not saying anything against maths. Okay, we can strengthen engagement through social connection and cooperative learning. We can support students' voice and choice, whether around the topic, the material they're using, or how they're presenting evidence of their understanding. We can create a positive class atmosphere. We can communicate high expectations. That doesn't mean like pass fail. We know high expectations means I believe in you. We can make sure that we're communicating appreciation and validation to our students. They really need to know that they matter to us and they're safe with us. I'm just going to block that out, that chat, because I can't see. It's coming up on my screen. We can build and maintain positive student-teacher relationships. That's one way we can work with emotions within literacy. We can use a calm tone, consistent routines, physical safety, and co-regulation. We want students to feel successful. We want them to believe that the work that they're doing is achievable for them and that you believe in them. And we want them to be positive about their learning. Safety and connection are key. Now, these things are all things that we can be considering when we've got students in a literacy lesson or whatever it is that we're doing, making sure that emotionally they feel safe and connected. But we know that we co-regulate, like emotions are contagious. So if we are not feeling comfortable about the approach, the material, the knowledge, if we are bringing in our dysregulation, we will more than likely dysregulate some of our students. So as much as possible, and I know that's not easy, we need to be as self-regulated as we can be. So there's also a part in here around how we feel. The challenge for us at the moment is there's so much information coming through, so much new learning, that a lot of teachers, professionals in the field, are feeling a little bit dysregulated, are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit stressed. So in those situations, it's best to come back to something simple and connection. Relationships and connection will be the thing that get you through a lesson, just as much as how well the material's been scaffolded. Okay, thanks, Deb. So when our brains are exposed to negative emotions, so if we're not doing that and there's negative emotions going on, such as fear, you've got a student in your class maybe who isn't good at reading, isn't good at writing. The teacher's just said, I need you to write 3 sentences about what you did over the weekend or something. Now that is our nervous system, if they're afraid, is likely, we know that's going to become activated and they jump into that fight, flight, freeze, whatever it is. And we know that that's going to lead to some of those behaviors that are challenging for us to manage often in the class. It releases negative emotions, release specific chemicals that then actually block a person's thoughts and behavior. And we know we lose access to our prefrontal cortex, our frontal cortex. This can be during learning, assessment, active participation, passive participation. And those negative emotions can be triggered in a number of different ways, and they can be really subtle too. It can be teacher attitude, body language, tone of voice, exposure to situations that make them feel anxious, such as speaking in front of classmates, taking a big assessment, working on an assignment with a short deadline, whatever it is. And what makes one student feel stressed or anxious may not make another student feel that. So it's a really tricky dance that we're having to do as teachers, to be aware, noticing and responding to what's happening in our class. Can I have the next one, please, Deb? So I've tried to pull a few things together. It's not just strictly science of learning stuff here, but it is science of learning when we're looking with emotions. And I've pulled it together that you might not see in other places. That just needed to make this relevant, I thought, to some of the things that were going on in the work that I'm doing. And I'm hoping it rings some bells for you as well. So they talk about stress being that Goldilocks level of stress. Not too hard, not too easy. Just right stress for learning means that optimal learning is going to happen. If it's challenging enough that it stretches a learner's abilities, but not too difficult that it causes frustration or anxiety, which would then lead to overwhelm. We don't want it also to be too easy, because then there's learners are going to become disengaged. Like if it's meaningless if you've already got it. That Goldilocks zone is going to help activate focus, motivation, and mental effort. The brain is alert, but still calm. It's not overloaded. So because information enters first through our senses and sent to our brain for processing through the amygdala, we need to be aware that whatever we're presenting kids with might be triggering for some kids. So noticing and responding in those situations is going to help us. Okay, so now we're going to click into more stuff around structured literacy and science of learning. So next, please. So explicit instruction. Anita Archer, I'm sure you all know Anita Archer. Archer and Hughes, 2011. I still don't really know much about who Hughes was. But explicit comes from a Latin word, plat, which it's related to making all of the pieces. All of the pieces have a part, and all of the pieces are important, and laying all of them out so you can see them all. So Anita Archer talks about these 16 golden kind of strategies, and these fit really nicely with structured literacy. So when we're thinking about structured literacy, we're thinking about building it carefully with all of the important elements in there. So these 16 are a really great place to start. We know gradual release of responsibility is part of an explicit instruction approach. We know that gradual release of responsibility really works from that I do, we do, and you do kind of releasing as students show competency into being more independent. So in that I do space, that's really the teacher is doing it. The teacher is owning it. The teacher is sharing the learning purpose, for example, and that's based on something that they have diagnosed or assessed. They are specific about what's being taught. They might use multiple modes of representation, so written and spoken, equipment, concrete materials. They might be explaining and describing. They might be using think alouds. Think alouds, so powerful. Modeling phrases, modeling language, modeling approaches to problem solving. That's in that I do space and that gradual release of responsibility. We're not saying to kids like we might have done, so what sound does SH together make? Shh. We're not saying that and expecting them to guess. We're saying SH together makes the sound shh. And let's look at some examples. This word uses it at the beginning. This word uses it in the middle. This word uses it in the end. Notice the sound. Let's write some of these words, but you're making that really explicit. Then from there, you move into the we do space, which is the guided practice part of the lesson. The students are practicing new learning alongside previous learning that they've done. And this is where they engage with new learning in slightly more challenging contexts. So they are retrieving information from and knowledge from their long-term memory, their previous learning, then they're encoding it as they're practicing it, and we're doing it with worked examples. So that might mean spelling and reading short words that contain that SH pattern that the teacher just talked about. We might be recalling other words that have similar digraphs or familiar words that use that digraph. And then we start to ask more questions about it. So what is, are you thinking about, you're thinking about, can you use that sound now to build another word? And we're making that more and more challenging. And because we're using not just reading and not just spelling, we're using both of those together within literacy. We're improving cognitive flexibility, then they can apply it in different ways. Then as students are starting to show, so you've done the I do, and then we've done that guided practice and it's really well scaffolded and supported. And then it might move from you scaffolding, supporting into students scaffolding and supporting each other. Then you move into that independent activities, those independent opportunities to practice. And we know the brain is a pattern seeker. It loves a pattern. Once it's learned a pattern, you can apply it in lots of different ways. So for me, knowing how to sow one type of seed then gives me a pattern that I can use to apply a different type of sowing a different type of seed in my garden, or pruning one plant to pruning another. It doesn't mean I always get it right, but once you've got a pattern, you can apply it different ways. Then at that point, that knowledge then becomes fluent, and the student then owns it. It makes sense to them. So remember, all of this is happening within an environment that supports emotions, it supports effective scaffolding, that it's built on what you already know about what the student needs, and you're there supporting and observing. It's not, we know there can be a tendency, or there may have been a tendency, and I see this more in that secondary space, not as much in the primary space, where it's sort of, this is what I want you to do, now do it. And the we do space is minimized, but it's in the we do space that we have lots of opportunity to impact learning. Oh, thanks, Adrian Pemberton. Right, so another thing that we can be doing, so we're using that I do, we do, you do, accessing prior knowledge. That's our hook. So in reading comprehension, for example, reading comprehension is related more to what a student knows about the topic than their ability to read. And there's a Dubbo study and the baseball study, if you're interested in finding out more about that. It showed that students that were poor readers compared to students that were more competent, the less competent readers, the decoders, did better at comprehending a text about a subject that they knew more about than the stronger readers who knew nothing about that topic. So accessing prior knowledge is really powerful. That's your Velcro that new information sticks to. So as much as you can, preload, pre-discuss, refer to what you already know, go back and think, remember yesterday when we did this, or let's practice these words that you already know, that we're developing fluency with these, and now let's add something into that. Okay, next, Deb, please. Thank you. Oh, am I on the wrong slide? Sorry, was I on, that was the accessing prior knowledge. Sorry, that was my accessing prior knowledge slide. Yes, please, next one. Loading, okay. Okay, so underloading we know is going to lead to boredom, disengagement, self-distraction. Underloading is just as harmful as overloading. It's like someone on the motorway going well under the speed limit compared to someone going well over the speed limit. Intrinsic load is the kind of load that we want. It's associated with the intended learning and the student's relevant prior knowledge. Tasks are going to differ on their intrinsic load based on the number of elements, the complexity, the familiarity of task items, and how these elements might interact. So what I want to look at in the next slides is some things that impact our intrinsic and extrinsic load. Yes, please. We need a safe word to move on to the next slide. Okay, so challenges that can create extrinsic load. So these are the things we need to think about. If something is too complex, unfamiliar, it's ambiguous, if a teacher just says, just do it. I mean, then this happens all the way through. For me, even in coming into a new cluster, if something is ambiguous for me, I'm finding that there's a lot of cognitive load going on. It means that I'm not doing things very efficiently and I have to work much harder at it. I get more tired, I miss key information, I'm not as confident, I'm not as competent. So it's new stuff is tricky unless it's really well scaffolded. If there's too much, if you're asking a student to look in other places to try and find information they need, that's going to add to extrinsic load. If instructions are too fast or too slow, too loud, too quiet, off topic, too wordy, that's going to contribute to extrinsic load. If the information that's important is not there to see for long enough, if it's too brief and then students have to try and hold that in their working memory, that's going to contribute to extrinsic load. And these other things here, I'm just going to give you a second to read it, but you can see those things happening in your classrooms. I can see that happening even in my work. Extrinsic load for me, second to bottom, background noise. Yikes, that was me. Okay, so in the next slide, we've got a few more things that impact our intrinsic load. So if we're thinking about the number of elements or steps in a task, if we're thinking about how dense the information is, if we're thinking about making things less abstract and more reachable, more accessible, if we're thinking about keeping the connections simple, not too complex, just that right level of challenge. Remembering that for new learners, they're going to need more scaffolding because their cognitive load is going to be bigger. If something is too restricted or too open-ended, that can be impacting intrinsic load. So these things are really important. Yes, it is really tricky to point that out, Kieran. So I'm thinking, what about if you talk to them about cognitive loading and give them some, I don't know, some guidelines around what research says might work, and then perhaps make a goal out of working on 2 or 3 of those, without saying reduce these, but perhaps enhance this. You know, it's like me on a diet. I don't need to stop eating chips, but if I fill myself up on avocado, I might be less hungry for chips. I don't know. Next slide, please, Deb, because I'm talking about chips and avocados. Okay, so within structured literacy, we know that this will be really familiar to you, that building is cumulative. Everything is built on something that's gone before. It's ordered appropriately. The phonics-based scopes and sequences are probably the most familiar, but we know that everything can be sequenced. Everything, building one element on top of another, moving from concrete to abstract, simple to complex, dependent to independent, all of that, whether that's making a souffle to you know, planting seeds, building some knowledge of some grapheme phoneme correspondences. So managing that sequence of learning using a scope and sequence is one of the really important things that happen within the science of learning, that science of learning is saying is important, and structured literacy is built on. This is part of our structure. And next slide, please. We can think of this as a lot of these resources are really familiar to us. So we know the Phonics Plus ready to read resources, Sunshine Decodables, for example, Little Learners Love Literacy. There's lots of them. You could be working through Letters and Sounds. You could be working through UFLI. I'm a UFLI fan, but a scope and sequence that moves from simple to complex is the way to go to build learning, because then straight away you've got prior knowledge, you've got lots of Velcro happening that new learning can stick to. Next, please. Chunking our learning, breaking up information so it's not too much at one time, but into little digestible parts, and framing that so that it can be distinguished from other information and then applied to other information or other contexts. So we can break up content, we can teach it explicitly, we can present it clearly, be clear about the essentials. Anita Archer says, cut the fluff and do the stuff. Using models and worked examples. So we're chunking that new information, chunking it into little pieces that can then be, they're manageable and they can be added to our Velcro. Some students are going to need that chunked. Some students are more able to handle lots of chunks together. It's about your knowledge of your kids as well, isn't it? And this is where it gets tricky. How do we manage all of this as teachers in the classroom? So next one, please. Active participation. So for students to be able to actively participate and sustain focus, to get information from the working memory into the long-term memory, students need to feel accepted. They need to feel safe. They need to feel valued. They need to have a positive sense of belonging to sustain their attention and focus within that environment, and then process new information effectively. So it can, that can impact motivation and safety and effort and engagement. So active participation, if you are doing a direct instruction, capital D, capital I, then that's quite specific. It really involves lots of, you know, thumbs up, whiteboard flipping, short, sharp, you know, so many responses in a minute, that type of approach. It doesn't have to be that rigid, but if that's if there can be a time and place for that, and if that's what would work for your students, that's worth looking at. So there's direct instruction, capital D, capital I, and then direct instruction that's not those capitals, and that's more just making sure that you're not doing the talking and people are just hearing it, but you are asking, inviting, challenging, requiring, expecting responses to be quick and not just from some people. There's a bit of controversy around that cold calling aspect, because active participation suggests that cold calling, meaning not waiting for kids to put their hands up, but actually asking kids to respond, that's really relevant because it keeps them actively engaged. But then you've got to temper that with, what do I know about these students? Are they going to feel anxious about that? Has someone got a processing speed challenge that may need a bit of a warm up? You might need to say, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute. It's going to be about this. I'm going to give you a second to think about it. And then they've got a bit of a heads up. So you've got to work with all of those moving parts together. Next one, please. Okay, prompt, targeted, clear feedback. We need to put in that feedback. Otherwise, students give themselves their own feedback. If we give the right feedback at the right time, we reduce a whole lot of unnecessary confusion. So feedback can support engagement and focus. We know that feedback can be encouraging, it can be reaffirming, it can be saying you're on the right track, it could be saying something like yes and you move them onto a new part. It could be straight away modeling a correction. Feedback is saying basically to a student, this is where I want you to be, and yes, you're okay, safe here to do it this way. Feedback can be about communicating high expectations too. It can be about inviting students to even give feedback even on themselves and reflection on themselves and their progress. Okay, next one, please. Okay, spaced retrieval practice and interleaved retrieval practice. So science of learning says that actually one of the really useful things you can do, we've got Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, there's lots of theories in here, but it's good to kind of forget something a little bit and then recall it again, because you're really having to strengthen that Velcro stick. It can be good to apply something that you've learned in a different context or a different content. It can be good to apply something that you've learned previously in conjunction with other things. So stick them together in new ways. All of that strengthens connections. And that doesn't have to be done at that when remembering structured literacy isn't just at that year 1 and year 2, year 3. Structured literacy can be about building complex sentences or compound sentences, or using subordinate conjunctions at further up in the school. It could be around building essays. We use structured literacy in everything that we're doing. So simple to complex. Remember, if the leap is too big, we're going to have gaps between the rungs, and the ladder are going to be too big, and kids are going to fall through. Okay, next one, please. I think I'm nearly here. Particularly in that we've done the I do and that we do, and then in that you do space, it's really about independent practice. We know the brain is a pattern seeker, so we need to set up opportunities for kids to then apply those patterns. So we're planning opportunities for kids to practice, ensuring high levels of accuracy. We're aiming to build and maintain skill proficiency and mastery. So that could be across different contexts. It could be even socially working with something in a cooperative activity. It's structured literacy really lessons are scaffolded through guided practice and independent practice. So there was a bit of a period as we were adopting structured literacy where, remember, it was like, no, burn your ready to read, send them to the islands, and people were getting rid of them, and we were sticking with going just with decodables. But using less decodables, using more of those leveled readers has a really important place. It builds more opportunities to apply, gives kids opportunities to apply the patterns that they've learned. They can build language structures. It's got more opportunity to learn those high frequency words. There's more concept development in those books than there are inside decodables. So having choosing boxes with books is really important, and you'll see your kids wanting to read books that aren't necessarily decodables. Decodables have a place, then we move into those less decodable books. Next, please. Okay, so the other thing that science of learning tells us that fits within structured literacy is that students understand what they're learning and why they're learning it. You don't necessarily have to do your waltz and we're learning to the way that we used to on the board and then everybody fitting that, that assessment for learning kind of approach. But even making sure that kids know why something is relevant and where it fits reduces that extrinsic cognitive load and helps it to become embedded. It makes our Velcros ready to receive new stuff. And we need to move from those little episodic memory is just when you remember something from a time, like the time that Mr. Murphy slipped over because he was running around a corner, that to something that is a concept, like things can be slippery when they're wet. You need to attach things in different ways. You need to know why it is that you're learning it, attach it in lots of different ways, make it meaningful and relevant, have opportunities to practice. And structured literacy lessons scaffold mastery through guided practice, which is more controlled, and into independent practice. Learning is cumulative. Okay, next. Diagnostic. We know lots of stuff about diagnostic. We know that we need to do universal screening to check where a student is compared to themselves previously or compared to others in their class or across cohorts. We know that it's a screener. It takes the temperature and lets us know whether we need to take a look at some students or some skills more carefully. We know that targeting more diagnostic type assessment is useful for some students in particular. So you might have picked up, well, there seems to be a group that are having difficulty with subordinate conjunctions. Let's see, well, that seems to be a class-wide thing. Okay, I'm going to do some more teaching in there, and then I'm going to progress monitor to see how well they're doing. But it could be one individual student across a number of skills. So we do universal screening, takes the temperature, targeted looks at why this kid's a bit hot or why this class is a bit hot, and that identifies the skills that need to be taught. Progress monitoring checks whether we are on target. Now, diagnostic assessments guide our planning, they guide our teaching, and it definitely fits within that science of learning and structured literacy. So structured literacy, remember, is informed by science of reading and science of learning. But remember that also within that, there's those lovely informal assessments, the low stakes testing, the observations, the conversations. That really gives us just as much information in that moment when then you're giving the feedback and then you're monitoring how well that's received. So being actively engaged in that learning, and none of that can happen if you are separate and not in that guided teaching space. You've moved in that we do. So noticing, recognizing and responding supports appropriate feedback and scaffolding. It supports the next lessons. It notices development and mastery. And that's equally important to noticing also if someone is feeling anxious or overwhelmed or disengaged. Next slide, please, Deb. And then I'm getting close to the end. Yay. So very strongly linked to emotion is motivation. We know it's bidirectional. That means that if a student is feeling bad about school or learning, then that can obviously reduce their academic engagement and achievement. But equally, lacking skills or confidence can create a sense of failure and be demotivating as well. So if you're motivated and believe that you can be successful, and then you recognize that success, that gives you more motivation, of course, to move into the next thing. So teachers, it's really useful to be aware of the phenomenon around that whole lack of success or confidence in learning, which then creates demotivation. So that's that reminding ourselves that opportunities, giving students opportunities for success is one of the most motivating and strengthening for engagement strategies that we can use. And next, please. Okay, so when we're talking about whole class versus group teaching, I know that's a tricky point too. We're moving and shifting our understanding around that. Traditionally, we focused a lot on group teaching, and then we've started to move towards whole class teaching with an understanding that whatever can be taught whole class should be, because when students are working independently in their groups, they're not necessarily engaged in the learning most effectively, or sometimes it's just sort of busy work. Whereas if you can get something going whole class and then build on that by revisiting, scaffolding, extending, enriching, whatever it is that you need to do with your groups afterwards, that's the best way, because then you're adaptive teaching. Even in whole class, you can be differentiating. That can be in something as simple as proximity. I've got you right next to me, or it could be the examples that you're giving kids to work with to show their understanding in that we do space. But whole class and group works really well together. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Science of learning is saying there's a place for both. If you're just doing group teaching, you're probably not taking advantage of some of those aspects of whole class that would work for you. And if you're doing whole class, you probably could be missing some small aspects of someone that needs scaffolding or enrichment or extension. The tricky thing, of course, in New Zealand is that we have staggered starts to school with our students. So it's very hard to just have them all come in on a day and go, okay, week 1, page 1, way we go. Week 2, page 9, way we go. Yes, it's tricky. And I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. But I'm just telling you this is what the research says. Okay, next slide, please. And because we're good, effective teachers, we recognize that individual needs might be different and then pathways might need to be different. And the learning progression of any student is not linear. It's going to go in fits and starts, accelerating and stalling at different times. Students come to school with different background knowledge, different emotional states, different histories, different language, and this impacts how easily they can engage with any given topic. And so while cognitively the learning process of each student is more similar than different students are going to respond to different teaching approaches, different activities, and different topics in different ways. So not everybody needs exactly the same approach at the same time. So it's really, this is again about building a balance between whole class and small group. But where possible, what I'm coming to appreciate is that approach that we used to do, and I'm not sure if it was sort of slowed down a bit, dropped away, I don't notice it as much now, but that across cohort teaching, where you pull together larger groups, it's a much more efficient use of time and space. Those that need one approach compared to the ones that need another. Right, so very near the end. So we know that structured literacy pulls together the evidence-based elements of what needs to be taught and the principles of how best to teach it. And those two things together work to support reading, writing, spelling. So last one, remember the principles are that learning is systematic, sequential, and cumulative. Next one, please. We know that it's diagnostic, we notice and respond, and that we really focus in on that explicit teaching. We are presenting with clear examples and explanations. And next one, please. And the principles guide how we do it. The elements, those are the principles. The elements guide what's included. So study of sound, those sound symbol associations. This is down at the basic level, the foundation level. But then that moves right up into morphology, syntax, semantics, and then we're thinking critically about what we've learned and applying it in different ways. Okay, and there's lots of parts to our literacy approach. Reading, lots of work can be done in that big oral language space and that big book space and those shared book space, lots of making meaning there. So structured literacy, even though it sounds like it's limiting, it isn't. It's about trying to pull the pieces together in a way that makes sense wherever a student is at. And the curriculum in the next slide really takes advantage of that. And more I'm seeing their guidance within the curriculum around, and the next slide, please, around the importance of different elements and approaches. Their guidance at the beginning of the phases around what to teach and why and how is really much more supportive, I think, than what we might have seen previously. I love that oral language has been prioritized. because we know that that's something that may have been deprioritized in our work a little bit. Okay, so next one, please. I'm not going to read these to you. I think that might be the alarm telling me to stop talking now. I know, I need one for my life. Dismiss? I don't know. That's not my phone. Right. The principles within the curriculum, I'm not reading these to you, but these are all there for you in your curriculum document. And the thing is, the principles change very little depending on across those phases. So the principles explained in phase 1 are very similar in phase 2, very similar in phase 3. The wording shifts only minimally. And the next one, please. And remember, those elements all need to be included, including oral language, and that they are emphasized differently in different years. Next one, and then we know that the curriculum is a much more science of learning focused English curriculum than our previous version. And it really matches the components that are important in a much more developmentally sequenced way. And next one. And that it's becoming easier and easier for us to understand why MSV doesn't necessarily fit within this, because MSV was asking kids to notice and use patterns or make up learning before they were ready for it. It missed the explicit teaching. So it's less about guessing, it's more about laying up things up so that there's a pattern that people can use, students can use in different ways. And then that's me, and I hope that made sense in some way. I really apologize for that stilted start. I was really distracted and not my best, but I hope that it made sense from the slides and you can use something from them. I appreciate everything that everyone is doing within this space because it's shifting and changing all the time, and it's not, we haven't got it sorted yet. Okay, thanks, Deb.
Tēnā koe, Julie. O te rā, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, everybody who's joined us today, and especially you, Julie, who's contributed your time and your experience and knowledge, and we really greatly appreciate and value that. And it's been a privilege to have you amongst this webinar and presenting today. So e mihi ana ki a koe. O te rā kia tātou, some of the questions that you've put into the chat will be able to guide us in our up and coming webinars. Also to note that today's recording will also be sent out to you, and we'll keep you updated with any other kaupapa that is happening within this space. Again, this is just to connect to our learning spaces, remembering that we moved from the Professional Learning Network and rebranded as RTLB Aotearoa. We've also got the QR code there, and our Term 3 pānui was also sent out to cluster managers, and so hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. There's a lot going on in the pānui, however, that's the nature of the beast, and we're all really, really well aware of that. So good luck and happy reading in relation to that. And thank you also to those who have participated in the focus group sessions alongside each of the working groups. So we'd just like to really say thank you for your participation. It's going to greatly support the mahi going forward for our space. No reira, atu I tērā, and any further words from you, Corinne, Michelle, just before we go and I close up?
No, just again, thank you, Julie. Just always, we just so benefit from having you with us. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your time with so much generosity. Thank you.
Yeah, and I tautoko that too, Julie. Thank you. And it's lovely to hear the trauma-informed joining with the science of learning. Brilliant.
Thanks, Michelle.
Ka pai, so no reira, hei whakaotia tātou. Māku te karakia whakakapi, kia tau ngā manaakitanga ki runga ki tēnā o tātou, kia piki te ora, kia piki te māramatanga, kia hoki pai atu, hoki pai mai, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, huie, tākie. Settle the care and protection upon each of us. May the health and understanding grow. Return well to others and ourselves. Hold fast to your authenticity. Be firm, join together, gather together, bind as one. Mauri ora kia koutou. Have a wonderful rest of your day.